All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's about 3:34. If anybody else joins in, they can go ahead and pick up. We are recording this webinar. My name is Amanda Barbarage. I'm with United Way of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for joining us for this unconscious bias webinar. We're going to go ahead and talk about a couple different things here, and I'm going to try not to rush through it, but it is a lot of material. So the reason I am doing this webinar is because I do have some experience with dealing with diversity and different cultures. I am a social worker by training and did a lot of cultural competency work. I am also marrying a man who was born in South Korea and was adopted and brought over to the United States. And a lot of his family was also adopted from different countries, and they have a lot of different ethnicities. So really, those unconscious biases and biases that really impacts me and my family now. So it's something I think about actually quite a lot. And United Way Worldwide strives to be a model of diversity and inclusion. Board members, staff, and volunteers reflect the many faces, cultures, and walks of life that make up the communities we serve. United Way respects, values, and celebrates unique attributes, characteristics, and perspectives that make each person who they are. We also believe that bringing together diverse individuals allows us to collectively and more effectively address the issues that each community faces. This unconscious bias training is not typical sensitivity or diversity training. This is about learning to recognize your bias and making better, more inclusive decisions at work. Inclusion helps everyone do their best work and feel part of their community. I'm really excited to be talking to you about this because it really affects every aspect of our lives, and making room for inclusion will let you experience all the benefits of your community. So what does it mean when we say unconscious bias? I'm going to give you a very quick lesson on how our brains have evolved, why we have unconscious biases, and how most of the time they're super functional and help us get through the day. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, we were competing against animals with claws and horns and teeth. Many of the decisions we made every day were life and death choices. We needed to be able to very quickly judge our surroundings. So let's play out, oh, I'm sorry, I accidentally went too far here. So let's very quickly play out a little scenario. One day our ancestors decide that they want to examine their biases. So they set out and they're walking across a forest clearing and they spot a creature approaching. Now, instead of jumping to conclusions, they carefully consider, well, it's thick and has a short tail, so it's not a wolf. It's bigger than a coyote. It's brown, got long claws, and can stand on its hind legs. I'm going to conclude that this animal is probably a bear, and I should probably run. The end result of our ancestors sitting down and taking the time to examine their biases may not have ended well for our ancestors. This is to show you that bias is an extremely functional and potentially life-saving trick our brains have learned. Unconscious or implicit bias help us get through the day and make thousands of quick decisions without us having time to think about them. Our brain is perfectly suited for quickly filtering huge amounts of information, prioritizing, categorizing, and summarizing our surroundings for us unconsciously. This served us well for a really long time, when our unconscious biases helped us avoid being eaten. Now we can go on to the next slide. We live in a different world today, but the need for filtering is just as important. Avoiding cars, ordering coffee, deciding where to sit on the bus, most of what we're feeling and deciding is driven by unconscious processing. This is very functional. While it's not the lions and tigers and bears we have been worried about thousands of years ago, the threat is data overload, and it too can have costly implications. But sometimes it can lead us astray, so today we want to focus on how bias can play out in our work environments. So the main takeaway from this slide is 99.99996% of our mental processing is ruled by our unconscious. So if there's one thing we can all learn today, I hope it is that you learn that you're biased. It's a surprise. I am too, so don't feel too bad. This is one of the key goals of our talk today, to have everyone acknowledge that we as humans have unconscious bias, and so does everyone in United Way. You also need to know that it matters. Just because we all know everyone is unconsciously biased doesn't mean we're doomed. We can and must consider our biases for the good of our organizations, the communities, and society. So how does bias affect our world? We're going to talk a little bit about the impact of bias over time. There are 4 major factors that can make us very prone to the influence of our unconscious biases. The first is a task. If the job we're assessing has common stereotypes associated with it, our unconscious will immediately bring these stereotypes up in our mind. For example, nursing and teaching are stereotypically female gendered jobs. If we're assessing these jobs, we may be more likely to be unconsciously biased to think that women are better suited to these jobs. The second category is numbers. When looking at a group of things, like a group of job applicants, if there's a clear minority group, minority here just meaning a group that is outnumbered by the others, our brains are more likely to bring up any unconscious bias we have with that associated group. This doesn't happen as often as there isn't a clear numerical minority in the group. Clarity. Whenever we don't have all the information, which is pretty much all the time, our brains will work to fill in the gaps using our own unconscious bias. This can be helpful, but especially if we're missing lots of critical information, it can be dangerous and can lead us to make poor assumptions. And then the last category is the perceiver. You, as the perceiver, can be influenced if you're stressed or rushed or emotional, like we are a lot of the time. We're always trying to get things done quickly, but when making important decisions, it definitely pays to slow down. I have a nice slide here with a very important message. Even a tiny bit of bias can have big consequences. Even the smallest expression can have a substantial impact over time. So we're going to talk about a graph I have up. It's a quick illustration of how unconscious bias can add up over time. So we have a study that was performed where they took 500 positions. So 500 entry-level positions at level 1, the total of 8 levels of positions. So to get from L1 to L2, it's 100% based on performance. 15% of the people quit at each level, which are replaced by the level below. Replacements have the highest performance scores from the level below. Performance scores were randomly assigned to men and women with a 1%, just 1% positive bias introduced to the men's scores. That way, they introduced the variance was that women received a score between 1 and 100, and men received a score between 1 and 101. The study ran 20 promotion simulations and averaged the results. Female representation declined with each simulation. So then I have the results of that study up, and you can see only 35% of the level 8 employees would be blue, and the level 8 employees are the highest promoted ones, and that's with just a 1% bias. Each promotion cycle had an impact on how the organization evolved over time. and ultimately the organizational structure drastically changes as a result of unconscious bias. We acknowledge unconscious bias doesn't affect every single interaction or decision. But even if it happens once or twice, all of our unconsciously biased outcomes add up over time and can have a significant impact on someone's life and opportunities. There's the snowball effect, and the impact compounds over time. So I know we've all heard this before. Diversity is critical to creating products for global users. Research shows that having a diverse team, they come up with more innovative solutions. To get the most from your diverse team, you need to create an environment where they feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to work and expressing themselves fully. Companies with higher proportions of women board directors outperform those with lower proportions by 53%, and with a 42% higher return on sales and 66% higher return on invested capital. Research also shows that diverse teams are more and better equipped to tackle complex problems and dream up innovative solutions. And now we're going to talk about what we can actually do about this problem. Our second goal is to get everyone here to commit to at least one action to combat the potentially negative influences of unconscious bias in the United Way and in our communities as well. So while there's a lot of science that shows our unconscious bias do in fact have a negative influence in the workplace, there's unfortunately still precious little science showing us the best ways to prevent this. But there are a few basic methods that have been proven effective and that can be adapted to work in any organization, in any environment. The first is to use structure to gauge success. And some of these solutions are so simple, and you could really hit yourself when you realize how simple they are. So structuring for success means using consistent requirements, criteria, and structure. Predefine requirements and goals for success. You need to write it down. How are you ensuring you consistently evaluate success if you don't know exactly what you're looking for? So I think that a lot of people have heard of this study too. I'm just going to go over it real quick. A 2004 study highlighted the need for defined criteria. In a study, 2 groups of resumes were sent out for the same entry-level sales and marketing job. One had an African-American sounding name, and another had a European-American sounding name. So the names I picked are Brendan, Greg, Emily, and Anne, versus Tamika, Aisha, Rashid, and Tyrone. These were the study names. So it took 50% more resumes for the African-American candidates to get a call back. That's 50% more, and it's a huge impact over time on someone's career possibilities. Another study presented an account of job discrimination according to which people redefine merit in a manner congenial to the credentials of individual applicants. In 3 studies, participants assigned male and female applicants to gender stereotypical jobs. However, they did not view the male and female applicants as having different strengths and weaknesses. Instead, they redefined the criteria for success at the job as requiring the specific credentials that a candidate of the desired gender happened to have. So commitment to hiring criteria prior to the disclosure of the applicant's gender completely eliminated the discrimination, suggesting that bias in the construction of hiring criteria plays a causal role in discrimination. So next we're going to talk about what makes a good manager. Researchers showed that there is significantly more overlap in the words used to describe a typical man and a successful manager than those used to describe a typical woman and a successful manager. 268 male managers used a 92-item attribute inventory to rate 1 of 7 target groups. The results were men in general as described as more similar to successful managers than are women in general. All of the study participants were working managers with 1 to 42 years of managerial experience. The median was 6 years. They were drawn from a variety of departments in a wide range of industries. The original study included people from 9 insurance companies. The area of concern comes once you look at the overlap of descriptors. What was found is that 56 attributes out of 79, so 71%, were rated more similarly to men. Think about that when some of your unconscious associations might influence who you select for a team, for a project, for a promotion, how they influence your expectations about a role and who is and is not qualified. So we're going to talk about busting the bias and how we do it. It's called structured job interviews. One way all organizations can do this is adopting structured interviews. Research has consistently demonstrated that structured interviews result in increased predictive validity and decreased differences between demographic groups and structured assessment tools. So rubrics is just a rubric, like the kind you did in high school when you were writing an essay, is something that you can develop with you and your team. Think about what success looks like for that particular role and what questions you need to ask to determine whether that particular candidate can perform that role. And then you have to apply those standards consistently across all the candidates you have for a job. So the second method to overcome unconscious bias is measuring results. Data is far less prone to unconscious bias than our own minds are, although it's not immune. So how are you collecting and using data to inform decisions and reduce the influence of unconscious bias? And a big question is, if you're not collecting your data, who is? And that's something United Way is pretty big on, is collecting our data and making sure that we're using it to spread our message. So collecting data about yourself and your organization lets you see patterns and learn new things you might have overlooked. So who and what are you working for? United Way is working to improve community and lives for all people all over the world with a diverse set of experiences, needs, and ideas. You need to channel those early on. Ideally, you have great representation among your team members, but when that's not available, sometimes taking the perspective of an outside person is a useful exercise. So this is a funny anecdote about YouTube. When YouTube first launched the video upload app for the iPhone, 5 to 10% of user uploaded videos were upside down. So they asked, why are 5 to 10% of people shooting videos incorrectly? But that wasn't the right question. The early design was the problem. The design was optimized for people who were right-handed and didn't account for the perspective of left-handed people. YouTube doesn't have mean-spirited engineers and any malice for left-handed users. What happened was that they unconsciously created an app that worked brilliantly for their almost exclusively right-handed developer team. So sometimes bias can lead to situations like that. 5 to 10% of the population is left-handed. This talks about the Google Doodles. I use a lot of Google examples because Google has formed a really nice unconscious bias training where they released to the general public and told us all these things about themselves, which I thought was very brave. So hands off for Google. They really did a good job. Google has long enjoyed celebrating birthdays of famous scientists, explorers, and innovators on their homepage. So they create the Google Doodles, which are pretty fun. However, it turns out they were mostly celebrating the achievements of men. This was pointed out by an educator who tracked all of the doodles and posted a gender breakdown and an open letter imploring them to do better. Their doodler team was actually about half women and was shocked by what they were doing. They immediately went about setting up processes to track and improve the gender representation in their work. 1 year later, the gender representation was 50%, and they are continuing to track that diversity today. So a 2005 study asked subjects to help provide performance scores for two individuals, a man and a woman, for their contributions on a stereotypically male task. In this case, it was preparing financial portfolios. As part of the study, subjects came in and were told about a task recently accomplished. It was a number-oriented task about financial portfolios, which was pre-tested beforehand to determine it was associated with male characteristics. The outcome of the whole project was extremely successful. So the people they were telling about this project got information about what each man and woman did separately. The half of the group that got the separate information, and then half of the group got information about what they did together as a team. Then the group was asked about how much influence over the project's success each person had. When individuals received information about what the man and women did separately, both the man and woman received relatively equal scores. But when they were given the group information about the overall success of the project, the man scored significantly higher than the woman. In the absence of additional information, our brain filled in the gap that the man would be better at the number-oriented task because of unconscious bias. So the third way to overcome bias is to evaluate subtle messages. There is a term called microaggression. I think this is a term that people hear a lot as well. It refers to very small behavioral cues that signal whether or not our contributions are valued, whether I want to talk to you, whether you're being included or not, and it unconsciously drives and influences our behavior. So it's important to ask yourself, what signals are you sending in your body language, in your casual comments, and feedback? You can also ask, what signal is your environment sending? What does your office say about your company's culture? What signals is your company sending externally? From the images on your United Way site to individuals chosen to speak externally, you're sending unconscious messages. And a little side story about this, I actually, when doing this, realized that we needed to look at our office for the first time. When walking into United Way of Pennsylvania's office, it's pretty obvious that our team is pretty exclusively women. Just based on the photographs and objects on our desks. It definitely has a feminine feel that our furniture doesn't have, but the pictures, objects on our desk, plants, those are all very feminine appealing. So it's pretty clear walking in here who has the power in this office. So I don't know if we need to get some more manly toys to put up to kind of take away some of that femininity. So this is another study we're going to talk about. This one was done in Texas. So they wanted to know what role difference plays on interactions. The researcher brought a group of 16 students into the lab. Each one got 2 hats, but didn't know which one it was. One said Texan and proud, and the other hat said gay and proud. They sent the 16 students out to a mall in Houston to apply for jobs. The researchers were not studying whether or not the students got the job, but what the nature of the interaction was. And this goes back to the signals we are sending individually and how we pick those up. Our body language, positioning, blinking, smiling, eye contact is all very influential. While we might not even realize it, we often switch our styles when interacting with different people. Sometimes it's harmless and adaptive, like when you're interacting with your friends, you are different than when you are interacting with your grandmother. Sometimes it's just due to our unconscious bias. Regardless, it's important to understand the impact of unconscious bias on your social interactions. So the groups had significantly different experiences depending on which hat they were wearing. If they were wearing the Texan and proud hat wearers, the perceived negativity was lower and the interaction was longer, and people actually used more words with the people wearing the Texan and proud hat. Those wearing the gay and proud hat had less words used. The perceived negativity of the interaction was higher, and the interaction length was shorter. You can think about why these subtle differences have occurred. You can think about yourself in a social mixer. When you are in a social mixer, you kind of gravitate towards people you feel comfortable with, who you sense some sort of similarity with. It might be that their hair is kind of similar to yours, they're dressed kind of similarly, or they even talk the same way. When we are encountering people who we think are different than ourselves, it can impose a barrier. Imagine when you're walking into a meeting where you know no one. Who will you sit next to? Without conscious processing, we may default to associating with people who we think are like us. Our unconscious bias may cause us to change our interaction style, sometimes in a negative manner. That has network implications and may cause us to inadvertently ostracize others. Now we're going to talk about social networking, but not like Facebook. Social networking is the term that we are using to describe the connection to other people in the workplace. If you can see my slide, you're the red dot. Every line is your connection to another person. You can see how many people you are connected to and how connected they are. Networks are critical to personal and career success. There's that term, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Social networks related to respect, political deference, access to information. People with strong networks have been shown to have faster career trajectories. If you're just going to people like yourself, you're not only limiting the information you have access to, but you are also limiting who has access to you. You want to be at the center of the network because you have more influence, you have more access to more strong information, and you are more likely to have better and more positive performance. And you want to have a connection to really important people, and that's a pretty universal want. We're talking about space again, and this is actually the study that had me thinking about United Way of Pennsylvania space. So one study at Stanford University highlighted the impact of classroom decoration and individuals' feeling of belonging and interest. The study showed that subtle environmental cues can cause a sense of inclusion or isolation. This experiment had undeclared male and female graduate students come to the computer science building to complete a questionnaire about their interest in different majors. Half of them went to a room that was very tech and geeky. So we're talking about video game decor, maybe some movie posters, sci-fi fantasy stuff. The other half went to a neutral room without any of that decoration. They found that reported interest in computer science by women and men when sitting in a room with objects stereotypically associated with computer science was much lower than when in a room not stereotypically associated with computer science. So yet again, we have to consider how our work environment might be alienating certain groups or sending subtle messages that only certain types of people are welcome. We don't want to throw out the toys, family photos, and houseplants, because that would break my heart in particular if we didn't have any decorations. But we definitely want to think about how to create the most inclusive workplace and what else we can add to our environments to make it more inclusive. The last method to overcome unconscious bias is a very powerful and tangible way to do it. We need to hold everyone accountable. So the first step to holding everyone accountable is holding yourself accountable. Research supports the idea that you can help make the unconscious conscious if you give yourself a moment. Don't close on the first decision that comes to your mind, especially when you're determining who to promote, hire, join the team, or even who you're going to have lunch with. Justify your decisions. If you're held accountable, you'll be less unconsciously biased. Tell people why you decided what you did. If no one will listen to you, you can write it down. And you can definitely make decisions collectively. We can keep each other's unconscious biases in check. Ask people to repeat back to you what they heard. Keep each other in check and call each other out. Call out unconscious bias when you see it, as it can be a learning moment. And most importantly, sometimes you're going to be wrong, and that's okay too. Like I said before, we're all biased, and accepting that will definitely make it easier. So when I'm talking about holding everybody accountable, it's important to empower everyone in United Way, in your community, and in every organization to help call out unconscious bias. We have to make it okay. We not only want you to walk away acknowledging your own unconscious bias, but to realize that you've hired great people because they're smart and they want to make the best decisions. They have to be sure to be empowered to challenge you or anyone else when they think unconscious bias is influencing decisions. This is not just an HR issue. This is about all decision making, and all of us are decision makers. It's about culture setting, and we're all culture contributors. It's about getting the most from our teammates. If we can't recognize our own unconscious biases, then we're not contributing or innovating at the level we could, and we are potentially blocking others from doing the same. You can have the most diverse team, but you won't extract anything from them if they don't feel free to contribute. Your unconscious biases and preset beliefs can hold people back. So now we're going to talk about how you hold other people accountable. And yet again, it's about that culture and starting to build it. So you can call out unconscious bias when you see it, and it can be a learning moment. And you can ask your colleagues to explain how they arrived at a decision. Sometimes that's the best way to do it, is to say, well, why did you decide that? And sometimes when they're talking to themselves and justifying their own decisions, they might realize themselves that they made a biased decision. It only takes a moment to think about it. And really encourage those collective decisions. Group decision making can be a very effective tool for weeding out unconscious bias, as no decision is made by a single individual and people contribute different information and ask different questions. So now we have our 4 methods to overcome unconscious bias on the screen. We've talked a way to combat them. We've talked about using consistent requirements, criteria, and structure that are predefined requirements of success. How to measure results and collect data, because data is far less prone to unconscious bias than our own cognition. How to look for small behavioral cues that signal who we're valuing and including, and how to practice holding ourselves and others accountable. So hopefully you can find one thing here that will make your United Way better. And my ask is for you to commit to one of these actions. Decide how you will begin unbiasing and commit to it today. And this is where I ask any questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and chime in. I don't think there's a way for our phone in viewer to ask questions. So if you do have any questions, phone in, then you can go ahead and email me. My email is amanda@uwp.org, and I can go ahead and email you any answers. And I do want to let you know that anything you ask will be anonymous, so we will keep it here at United Way of Pennsylvania. This is a hard topic, and it's not something that is easy to talk about, but having these conversations is very important, because without them, we don't know how to move forward. So this was really a prelude to a session that's going to be at our 2018 United Way of Pennsylvania conference. Darlene Slaughter, who is much better at this than I am, she is the Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer of United Way Worldwide, will be hosting a session called Building Bridges, Conducting Courageous Conversations Around Race and Equity. to continue this conversation, and they will actually be practicing some role-playing, how to fully and effectively engage stakeholders in difficult discussions about race, equity, and inclusion. And that session is Thursday, June 21st at 3:45 p.m. So you are more than welcome to attend that session. If you're coming to the conference, this webinar is, like I said before, recorded. So it will be made available on the United Way of Pennsylvania website. And I am not seeing any questions, so I am going to go ahead and end this webinar a little early. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.